cinnamon donut, coconut whip, chocolate. These are not ice cream flavours or vapes, they're toothpaste. Two Gold Coast high school friends have earned themselves a spot on the list, Australia's Richest 250. That's the Australian's annual definitive ranking of the billionaire class and everyone closing in on billionaire status. This year, two new entrants are Alex Tomic and Nick Merkovich, founders of a business called Hi Smile, which started with tooth whitening kits and is now selling $300 million worth of beautifully packaged, quirkily flavoured toothpaste a year.
All right, red velvet toothpaste. Whoa, that is so red. Oh my God, that instantly tastes like a red velvet cupcake.
John Stenzel is the Australian's lists editor.
It's taking a boring old product in toothpaste and making it cool. Like the kids out there are collecting Hi Smiles toothpaste because they're limited runs and they're all these amazing flavours and colours. If you think about brushing your teeth, which most people should do probably twice a day, right? So these guys have come along and they've put all these crazy flavours in it, like chocolate and all the strawberries and all this sort of thing. They're bright packaging, and they've just done this from the Gold Coast. And you go over to Walmart in America and they've got shelf space there now. Sephora in Europe, Boots in the UK. I mean, obviously around Chemist Warehouse and the supermarkets here in Australia as well. But again, it's like a sort of boring old product that they've made cool, tastes good, and it's going around the world.
Being a toothpaste magnate sounds like a throwback to old-fashioned heavy industry, the manufacturing titans of the 1930s. But Hi Smile is very much a new economy story. Their success is almost entirely down to clever social media marketing. They've got a generation of TikTokers spruiking the products for them. It started with celebrities like the Kardashians and the UFC fighter Conor McGregor making videos about tooth whitening. Now it's exponential. Because the products are going viral, more and more ordinary people with TikTok accounts want to get in on the trend.
This cookie dough flavoured toothpaste is so sweet, but unfortunately it didn't pass the freshness test.
The cosmetics industry has traditionally tried to preserve a sense of hygienic mystique and talk up its scientific credentials without ever actually showing you what goes on inside its factories. Remember the Pond's Institute? Hi Smile breaks the fourth wall, giving its customers a curated peek inside the research and development process, featuring a lot of flavours being thrown in the bin.
Here are some that we're still testing. We've got citrus lemonade that is just too zesty. We've got sour apple, which is just too sour.
On Friday, the full Richest 250 list is released in The Australian and at theaustralian.com.au. But we've got a sneak peek for you today. John, who's on top?
Jana Reinhardt this year, record-busting $50 billion, Claire.
Now take us through the top 10. I might ask you for the top 11 actually, and you'll understand when we get there. Who's number 2 and 3?
Okay, so Andrew Forrest and Nicola Forrest together for the first time on the list. So combined $37.17 billion if you want to be precise. Then you get Anthony Pratt and his family at $27.66 billion at number 4. Harry Triguboff, our pretty 91-year-old property doyen, number 5. Mike Cannon-Brooks and Scott Farquhar are 6 and 7 from Atlassian. Now, they're separate, so Mike's just slightly ahead of Scott, $22.9 billion against $22.6. Clive Palmer at number 8. He is at almost $22 billion, we'll call it. And then there's a bit of a gap to Kerry Stokes at number 9. He's about $11 billion. And then, as you said, Cliff Obrecht and Melanie Perkins, joint 10th and 11th. So they're combined $10.92 billion.
Andrew and Nicola Forrest, the mining billionaire and his wife who has worked with him since the very beginning of his mining operations, famously separated not so long ago, and listeners to the front will remember you telling us about that separation. It rocketed Nicola Forrest, of course, into the billionaire league in her own right. They're number 2 and 3 on the list, both listed with the joint holders of $37.17 billion. Were you tempted to put Nicola Forrest in there by herself?
I think at the moment, given that everything is combined 50-50, previously everything was under Andrew Forrest's name, and then since the split, if you go through the records of the companies like Tatarang is their huge private business, it is literally 50-50 Her name is now on Fortescue shareholdings as well. Philanthropy will have a huge Minderoo Foundation. So for the moment, we'll keep it together. If there's further splits, I think any significant assets, she goes off and does her own thing. We'll certainly reconsider that. But clearly, even if you just halve that number, they're both in the top 10 in their own right.
Two of the big features of this year's list is that it's young, there are a lot of new entrants, and it's global. Australian-born companies like Canva, Atlassian and Zimmerman that are international in their ambitions. Some things don't change, however. Jana Reinhardt has been the richest woman in Australia for a few years now, and she's reliably on top of this list. I wonder if she's ever going to move from the top of that list, John.
Well, we'll probably have to see what happens with Canva's share price if it ever floats on an exchange, and they're talking about doing that in 2025, as early as the middle of next year. But what I think is interesting is if you look at that top 10, there's actually 3 women there that control almost $100 billion worth of wealth in Australia. And I don't think that's ever happened in our history. That's unprecedented. So, look, it shows you the changing nature of entrepreneurship. There's still, I think we've got about 33 women on the list this year out of 250. It's still not enough. But at the top of the list, that's certainly more than what it's ever been. And there's other entrepreneurs that are female that are coming through, founders of companies that are making their mark earlier than ever before.
We'll see, of course, some people falling off the list when we read the list in full on Friday. What sort of people are falling down the wealth scale at the moment?
Look, I mean, I think if you look at probably some of the old economy companies, in manufacturing, some technology companies do rise pretty quickly and fall off as well. Look, the share market's been a bit choppy in the last year, so there are some companies that have really, the share prices have dropped dramatically. I mean, we had an investigation into Worley, for example. John Grill was the founder of that. He comes off the list this year after some issues they were having overseas in Ecuador and other places. So, look, I mean, things will rise and fall on how things are going on exchanges. Profits will fall off as well. I think there's some construction companies that are having issues too, clearly. So you'll see some of those that are older industries, I suppose, that are struggling a bit more in comparison to some of the new ones.
Coming up, what's going on for one of Australia's most fascinating billionaires, Justin Hemmers. All the rich listers read The Australian, but you don't need a fortune because it costs a lot less than a tube of fancy toothpaste each week. Join our subscribers today at theaustralian.com.au. We'll be back after this break. If you're out and about in Sydney at night, there's a good chance you'll hear the ivy before you see it. The sprawling entertainment precinct consumes almost an entire block across from Wynyard Station. It's a stylish mishmash of pubs, clubs and restaurants. And of course, there's a famous pool bar. Local and international DJs play the ivy every Friday and Saturday night, meaning you'll need to cop a pricey cover charge in excess of $75 just to get in the door. It's a price hundreds of revellers are happy to pay. In fact, the place is almost always heaving. The Ivy opened in 2008, the brainchild of the so-called Sydney bar tsar, Justin Hemmers. It was an attempt to bring some Las Vegas/LA/London style glamour to the harbour city. And it worked. The success of the Ivy inspired Hemmers to look further afield with a view to expanding into Melbourne and elsewhere in New South Wales. But then the pandemic. Here's John Stenzel.
So a few years ago, when things were looking better across other facets of the property market, if you think about hotels and particularly office, Justin had this idea about a $1.5 billion overhaul of the Ivy precinct in Sydney CBD. He still wanted to keep restaurants and, I suppose if you want to call it, the party facilities there, right? But also wanted to build office blocks and hotels and other, safer, I suppose, if you want to put it in inverted commas, facets of the commercial property market. Now, we've had COVID, the office market is not as good. Justin's put those plans on ice for the moment. He still sits on prime Sydney CBD land there, so it clearly is right for development if he wants to do something with it one day, but it'll just be interesting to see what that mix of development is.
A few years ago, he was central to agitating for protection of Sydney's nighttime economy as the New South Wales government brought in pretty restrictive alcohol laws in response to some terrible acts of violence in Sydney.
We've lost our son Thomas. He was 18 years old. He died for absolutely no reason, walking down a Sydney street at 7 minutes past 10 p.m. on a Friday night. And it's time that this state, that Barry O'Farrell, finally did something about alcohol fuel violence to make a difference, to make us all safe.
Now, people who run hospitality businesses are worried about drinkers and partiers ever coming back to the city. What's happening in terms of hospitality right now in that regard? We've run stories in The Australian about how Thursday nights are the big night now. Is hospitality ever going to get back to where it was before?
Look, I think if you have really high quality hospitality like Justin's Maryvale Empire has, there's still big demand for what he's done, overhauling pubs into great places to eat, good places to drink, and that sort of mixture of the front bars and then, the fantastic restaurants out the back and other things that he's done in regional as well, down the New South Wales South Coast. Yeah, he's looking at Melbourne. It's opening, I think, later this year. He's gone down to the Victorian surf coast as well. So, look, I think if you do it really well. People will save their money for those big nights out. There's clearly a battle for people's wallet at the moment, the share of the wallet. And I think if you do it well, people are still going to go along. But otherwise, people will probably save their pennies for other things.
John Stenzel is The Australian's lists editor. The List, Australia's Richest 250, is in The Australian and at theaustralian.com.au on Friday morning.